Yeah, good morning, Neeraj. As far as Dr. Reddy is concerned, I think there is definitely going to be a slight negative reaction to the stock today morning. But I think clearly, I think we would like to wait for the management commentary as to how negative this impact would be. Because this has been a kind of a, slightly negative surprise which the markets and most of the analyst community was not expecting. So I think, we'll like to take a cautious call here. I think anything serious could definitely mean some more damage. But I think clearly our sense is that unless and until we get the management commentary, I don't think the markets are going to give it a thumbs down completely. And as far as the pharma pack is concerned, I think we are looking at companies which have got large exposure to the US market, something like Sun Pharma or typically even a Torrent Pharma. I would believe that now conditions in the US market have improved a lot. There are very little FDA issues, and I think margins are definitely going to get better in the next, say, 1 or 2 quarters. And I think that's what the market is looking at. So typically, companies which are largely globally positioned in the US markets could benefit a lot. And there is most importantly, yeah, overall, if you were to ask me on the broader market, I think now the cabinet selection is going to be a key trigger point. So, I think Tamanna asked what is the view on the market previously to the previous guest. My sense is, once we get to know the cabinet allocations, I think the markets could again take a very strong re-rating kind of turn, which I think it looks to be very much possible in a couple of days. I think clearly, Home Ministry, the Finance Ministry, the Railway, and the Defense Ministries, these are going to be critical sectors. And I think if there is continuation in these, ministries, then I think the markets are going to give a big thumbs up. Specifically, just ahead of the budget, I think if we can get similar faces and similar portfolios for the same, ministers in the previous regime, then I think the markets are definitely going to first focus on these 3 to 4 sectors. I would personally believe that it seems to be well orchestrated that the BJP is going to get major portfolios, and at least as of now, the coalition seems to be moving very smoothly. I think once the cabinet allocations are known by the market, the second point to be noted would be what would be Mr. Modi's 100-day agenda, and then obviously the forthcoming budget in July. So I think once these allocations are announced, my sense is I think the markets would get a good bump up based on the fact that markets would be happy that there's going to be a lot of continuity in policies. And I think the markets would be looking forward to the budget in July. Yeah, I think Tamanna, I think Raymond should do remarkably well because considering the fact that they've got a very large land bank and a very promising kind of location. Clearly, I think FY25 should be a lot better, and I think real estate markets are doing pretty well. Inventories are moving pretty fast. More importantly, I think the real impact of the inventory getting reflected into revenue would get reflected in FY25, possibly from the third and fourth quarter of this year. So my sense is, that this is definitely a big positive for the company. In terms of redevelopment, I think they would definitely make decent margins, and I think most importantly, most of the cash flows would get reflected from the current year onwards. So I think yes, if a long-term investor wants to invest, I think he can definitely look at Raymond. My sense is that the next 12 to 18 months, the order book visibility is very strong. Margins are going to get enhanced. And I think most importantly, this event was, awaited for a very long time. So I think now the monetization process is going to start from the second half of FY25. So definitely longer term prospects are good. Any dip in today's market, hopefully, in the early trade can be used as an opportunity to accumulate. Yeah, I think Tamanna clearly, ARPUs are going to go up, and I think this is a story which I think markets were already expecting. So now with elections out of the way, one could expect some kind of news flow on this front, and I think the management of Bharti had clearly indicated that there was a significant scope for a potentially good rise in the ARPU, and I think the industry has also recovered. I think there's a lot of consolidation which has happened. And I think a decent amount of pricing power now continues to be back with the telecom players. So I think probably you will see some action possibly by end of the month. Some amounts of ARPUs could be announced after the first quarter numbers are released, and I think that is something which the markets are also looking forward to. Tamanna, in the short term, this could be a little bit of a negative surprise, but I don't think it's going to create any panic sell-off. See, I think the company is sitting on a very robust order book. The wind market is also doing very well. And I think once the management clears this issue, I think they should clear it in the sense that to remove any doubts in the mind of investors, specifically the institutional and the larger investors, I think things should be back to normal. I wouldn't be surprised that this may not take any major connotations on the negative side. But we'll have to wait and watch to how the management reacts to this development. Definitely not expected, but I think it's not going to create any big panic sell-off. No, I think my guess is Keynes Technologies and the other player, basically Dixon and Avalon Technologies. These are basically companies which I think over the longer term they're sitting on a very large order book, Neeraj. I would not be surprised that Avalon looks pretty attractive considering that they've got a base not only in India but abroad. And Keynes, according to me, I think has moved up quite significantly. So maybe I mean on dips one could definitely look at it, but the entire EMS space is something which is going to be in the limelight for the next 2 to 3 years. These are all largely domestic focused and export focused kind of companies. And with a robust order book, I think you need to give some time for these companies because most of these companies are trading at fair to expensive valuations. I think only the long term investor can make good amount of money. In the shorter term, I don't think it's going to be a big upside for these companies. So I think it's better to accumulate them on a portfolio perspective and take at least a 12 to 18 month kind of time frame to get a decent risk reward. Yeah, I think Tamanna, if you look at the kind of investments ONGC is carrying out and the importance for the oil and gas sector, my sense is that apart from upstream companies like ONGC, Oil India, even the downstream companies, the oil marketing companies could be in focus because now with elections over, typically now the new government sworn in, my sense is that we could see a little bit of price improvement in terms of the pricing for these companies. Most importantly, the automotive and aviation sectors, which are the large customers for oil marketing companies, seem to be doing pretty well. Throughput has increased. Margins have improved in the fourth quarter. So definitely better kind of outlook can be seen even for the downstream companies. And I think as far as SJVN is concerned, I think the entire power space, the renewable energy and the thermal energy space could be in focus because this is one area where in the coming budget the government would definitely reiterate its stance of giving some further incentives to this sector. So I think markets are probably discounting the fact that now in the coming month when the budget is announced, you're going to see a lot of action among within the power sector. So I think that could be possibly the reason, but definitely outlook seems to be positive for the longer term. Well, I think Neeraj, within the choice of the stocks you made, I think Nagarjuna Construction (NCC) looks to be quite promising, purely based on the fundamental aspects of the business, the order book, and the execution, and the likelihood that construction and EPC companies are going to benefit in the coming budget. As far as Heritage Foods is concerned, I think clearly the stock has gone up purely on sentiment. I think fundamentals will now take a front seat. Once the numbers come in for the April to June quarter, we have been seeing very strong numbers from dairy companies, and I think that's a good point. But I think at these levels, I think I would be a little cautious on the remaining companies, specifically stocks like Amara Raja or Heritage. NCC looks quite promising, and I think investors should understand that I think there would be ample opportunities, in the market over a period of time. It's not that they have to buy the same stocks. There are clearly opportunities within the mid cap, and the small cap space would definitely emerge. So I think it's better to be very selective now rather than jumping the gun on stocks which have already moved up quite significantly. No, I think Paytm definitely, Tamanna, after the news flow in the market has come that Adani could possibly take in a small chunk in the company. That has been the main trigger point, for the bounce back in the Paytm stock. And I think we would await some more clarity here. But I think clearly, if this development clearly materializes, then I think the markets would obviously view Paytm from a different perspective. So I think around 400 odd rupees, I would not be surprised that this could be a good value pick if one were to take the next 12 to 18 months, because I think the markets would then expect some key changes and some key more aggression, on the company's strategy and overall, increase in market share. As far as stocks are concerned, I think we still continue to be positive on, the larger companies, auto companies, specifically Tata Motors, Mahindra and Mahindra, auto companies like Samvardhana, Motherson, Sundaram Fasteners. I think these are bets which I think should do exceedingly well. And of course, the large capex, players like L&T, Cummins. Cummins, we are looking forward for the government to announce its first, hydrogen policy, which I think is going to create a lot of buzz in the market. And I think clearly numbers for Cummins were very strong. Once the hydrogen policy is announced, I think you could see a lot of action on this counter. So I think we are going to be selective initially, and probably the budget will give a clear indication as to what is the budget government's policy directive and what is the kind of focus areas for the government. Yeah, I think Tamanna, the company has been quite successful in bagging regular orders around 800 to 1000 crores, and the latest order actually adds to their order book quite significantly. So I think within the power transmission space, specifically both for the domestic and for the export markets, KEC is one of those companies which should benefit significantly, from the power sector reforms which are likely to be announced in the coming budget. So I think even at these levels, if one were to take a call, I think over the next say 12 to 15 months, I would not be surprised that FY25 and 26 could be strong years for the company. So I think definitely worthwhile looking at this stock slightly from a medium to long term kind of position. Tamanna, the PSU banking space looks pretty attractive. I think, if you look at the railway defense stocks, these are stocks which have significantly moved. So I think incremental upside here seems to be limited, although the traction here continues to be solid. I would believe that, the larger PSU banks like Bank of Baroda, Canara Bank, State Bank of India, I think these are banks which are still undervalued and where a lot of runway is available for growth. And I think once the budget is announced, you're going to see a lot of noise on infrastructure, capex, make in India. So all that is going to percolate into a large piece of business. Plus, typically, the smaller banks which operate in the MSME, SME space, typically something like an IDFC First Bank for a very long time, this stock has underperformed. But I think considering the kind of opportunity available here, I would not be surprised that this is also one good re-rating candidate. So I think these are selective picks which I think the market players or investors should actually accumulate ahead of the budget. Some good news comes on the infrastructure corporate capex is definitely bound to put a lot of action in these counters, and I think balance sheets have improved. The asset quality has taken a big positive kind of turn, and most importantly, they are funded properly. So all said and done, I think the larger banks and smaller banks, IDFC First Bank, these have been the picks which we have been telling our clients to accumulate ahead of the budget. Adani Ports is very well positioned. In fact, we believe it's a quasi monopoly player in the port segment. And I think, if India has to grow, infrastructure has to grow, ports have to grow. And I think this is where you're going to see a very strong kind of upside over the medium to long term. My sense is that already large institutional investors are entered the stock. Even from these levels, if one were to take a 18 to 24-month view, I think visibility seems to be pretty solid. Their cargo volumes have grown up significantly. They've been acquiring, ports. And most importantly, I think this is a very stable, sustainable kind of business, which I think eventually is going to give them big rewards. So I think, any dip in the market price for whatever reason should be used as an opportunity to categorize this as a very strong portfolio kind of stock.